So, you want to be a dungeon master.
So you want to be a dungeon master.
So you want to be a dungeon. So you want to be a dungeon master. So you want to be a dungeon master.
That's great. We're here to help. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Justin. This week, we're covering combat. Episode 4 was all about the basics, but now we're going into the weeds. So gas up that riding mower, Mimo. We're going for a ride. We're going to talk about terrains, monsters, balancing, and strategies. If you want to DM for a game of D&D, whether it's 5th edition or 2024, then eventually combat is going to come up. So let's get into it. But first... I'm going to be first. Taylor, we're both neurodivergent. How can DMs keep... I promise that relates to the question. How can DMs keep their players engaged during combat encounters? For example, sometimes combat can take a while, people's turns take a long time, and you start to disassociate. You start to get distracted or bored even. Not necessarily anyone's fault, but what can we do?
Well, as a player and a DM, a lot of times there's not a whole lot you can do. And it's not a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing of, if you're doing a combat that's hours long, it's okay for people to check their phones or to look out.
Exactly.
But we kind of talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but it's not really a problem until it's a problem. It's when players are taking, disassociating, and then when it comes to be their turn, they don't know what they're going to do. That's when it becomes a problem.
Right. Yeah, when
it's actually actively slowing the game down, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, when people have to repeat themselves, when it's like we have to replay everything that just happened because someone wasn't paying attention or something like that. That is when it becomes a little bit of a hindrance. But at the end of the day, there's going to be times where people look at their phones, and that's okay. It just is what it is.
Yeah,
we're here to have a good time, and it's fine.
Yeah, but getting back to the actual question, one of the biggest things that I think keeps me engaged as a player is making the fight itself dynamic and not just, okay, it's my turn, I'm going to run up and do this spell, and then I'm going to bonus action, disengage, and run away. Stopping for a minute and be like, okay, what does that look like? Ask the players on their turn, like, hey, what does this spell look like? What does it do? And I know at our table, generally, our players are pretty good about just doing that. And that just in itself keeps people engaged.
Yeah, for sure.
Having cool scenes playing out over the course of the fight keeps people engaged. I think that's where a lot of people kind of start the disassociation process, is when the battle becomes like video game level of, okay, it's this person's turn, they're going to run up, do 2 slash attacks, and then run away. Or,
Yeah, absolutely. I think descriptor words and like flavor and adding all those different dynamic elements just to make the combat cooler is a huge help. And then also like, from the DM's perspective of what the DM can do specifically is also like having the combat have like layers, not just like, 3D layers or something like, oh, there's high ground or whatever, but like layers in the sense of like, if your combat is dynamic enough, then it kind of forces the players to think in a level of advanced strategy. You know what I mean? Like it for some reason, this is weird. It reminds me of like when I was a kid in like elementary school even, and just getting so bored in school and like by relation, my grades suffering, and the fix was putting me in higher level classes. Yeah. This is a humble brag.
Yeah.
But like,
I mean,
you have to kind of challenge people a little bit and be like, if things are too easy and too simplified, then sometimes it's boring. And so adding in like levels of things, whether that means making the combat more challenging or like having monsters who have unique abilities and stuff that players have to work around, or the environment is like dynamic because there's moving parts and different environmental hazards or layer actions or whatever. All of those things lead to the players having to think a little bit more and therefore more engagement.
Yeah, I agree. It's adding something to the fight of either, like you were saying, of like the dynamic map where, the map changes over the course of the fight, or adding some kind of like a secondary objective or some kind of puzzle that is going on during the fight.
Mm-hmm.
That will definitely keep players thinking about what's going on in the fight and how to accomplish this secondary task.
Yeah.
While also thinking about what they're going to be doing with their turn.
100%. Yeah. Having there be multiple goals. The goal isn't always just kill the bad guy. It's also save these innocent folk. And because even just adding in like townspeople or whatever into the combat, now the players have to think more strategically. Right. Unless you have an evoker wizard you can't just fireball.
Right. You can't just blow it up.
Yeah. You have to think a lot harder about how you're going to do things and stuff. And it gets fun. Yeah, I agree. I think, sometimes a challenging combat is more interesting and therefore more engaging than a super simplified combat. Not that simple is necessarily bad. I don't want to equate those two things. It's just different.
Yeah.
It depends on how many combats you're having in the span of your campaign or whatever. We've always talked about that. Like a one shot, if you only have one combat in the one shot, make it interesting, man. Like really go above and beyond because it's the only combat that there is. And it can be tricky,
sure.
Like I fall back in one shots, and this is kind of true for some of the actual plays and stuff like that. I've started leaning a lot on my monsters being glass cannons.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Because it's like super big hitters, but then they drop really easily. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. Where it's just like, hey, it's not going to take that many rounds of combat because if it's just a big old sack of hit points and it's like not doing a ton of damage, then it just gets a little boring. When the combat hits that point, and we'll talk about this more in the meat of the episode, but like when the combat hits that point where the ending is inevitable, I think that's when it takes a turn and it becomes boring.
Yeah.
When it's now we're just going through the motions.
Now we're just, okay,
we all
cool.
know.
I walk up, I do the hit. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah,
your turn.
It's like,
okay, I walk up and I hit.
Die.
Right.
We're just playing through it, and it's like, okay, well, that's less fun than having a monster where it's like, listen, if this monster hits you, it sucks.
It sucks.
Like I love stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's really, really challenging and interesting, and having monsters with like interesting abilities. Yeah. Like there's only so many times you can use a monster where it's just like their whole shtick is they're strong. And so they pack a big punch with their hits and that's it. And it's like, I guess every once in a while that could be fine. As a minion, it's definitely fine. But if that's like the only monster you're fighting, then it's like, that's a little boring. Having monsters with more interesting abilities.
Sprinkle in some lair actions, sprinkle in some kind of other legendary actions. Give it something else to do.
Yeah, give it a bonus action for free or something. We just played out the finale of the first season of Mall Madness 99, and without spoilers, some of those monsters had abilities where it was like on your turn you get this ability and then make 2 attacks. And that doesn't include the bonus action. I was like, dang, they got a bunch of abilities.
Right.
That's some of that is shout out to Kobold Press, Tome of Beasts, all those volumes. Some of their abilities were freaking crazy. I was like, dang, this is really, really interesting.
That was a wild combat. Yeah.
Some of those abilities were just cool. Even just the names of them, I remember saying out loud, being like, and he's going to use his corpse detonation ability. It's like, I'm sorry, what? You heard me. Just like it sounds.
You heard what I said. You heard what I said.
So interesting.
Oh man. The one time that my new evasion ability actually did something is
finally.
But I mean, dude, evasion's so cool. It's such a cool ability.
It's
that's a whole different episode.
Yeah,
that's a whole different episode.
Evasion. Hey gang, we wanted to talk to you about something pretty important real quick. See, we have some really cool ideas for the future, but we need your help. You can do that by supporting us through our Patreon. At the lowest tier, you get early access to podcast episodes, access to episodes of Action Surge, our post-session table talk show, and entry into a private channel on our Discord server. At the next tier, you can get access to Bonus Action, our bonus content podcast where we talk about a huge variety of D&D and TTRPG related things, like multi-class mystery mashup, where we get 2 random classes and have to build a character, or Monster Matchmaker, where we go over our favorite monsters at each CR level, or recaps of our home campaign, plus so much more. Joining the Patreon helps us continue to grow and put out content that gets better and better as we learn, improve, and try new things. So, check out the link in the description to join the gang today.
So I do have one question for you, getting back to the but first question.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about a turn timer? I've read a couple of stories on Reddit where DMs have had this issue of players dissociating on their phones. And, a lot of times it's because of the table size. If you have, 9 people at the table, it's really hard to keep all 9 people engaged the whole time. It's impossible. So what some DMs have done, I'm not saying, I don't know that I would ever do this, but I want to see what your thoughts are of like, how do you feel about saying, okay, well, when it's your turn, you've got 60 seconds to come up, or 2 minutes to tell me what you're going to do with your turn, or you just get skipped.
Oof. Yeah, that feels like the harsh example, because I could see that working. Certain tables who are very proficient with the system and like proficient with their character sheets and stuff like that, I could see that being actually beneficial. However, the second you have players, or a DM for that matter, where things are a little muckier in terms of the knowledge of knowing your character and knowing all these abilities and how everything plays out and stuff, then it gets really crazy, because I think it will discourage like questions or like really interesting moves. Like our actual plays are a great example of like the rule of cool coming in combat a ton. And if you're strapped for time, you might just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to do the normal thing I do every time. And so I think it could discourage some creativity. I could see it working. It depends on the time limit, depends on the table, and it depends on like all the intricacies. Like, what about when they ask a question? Are you pausing the timer to be like, okay, let's look up this rule or whatever,
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. Another idea that I would bring up in lieu of a timer is maybe, and I as a player wasn't a huge fan of this, but that's actually because of my like ADHD, and like so sometimes I want to like walk around and like, hey, it's not my turn, I can go pee really quick come back. By the time my turn comes around, I'll be fine. And like, but I've played in a game that did popcorn initiative, so you roll initiative like normal, and then it's just like when you were in class and like popcorn reading. I don't know if your classes ever did that, but like it's like, okay, Justin, it's your turn to read, and then I read a paragraph, and then I get to pick who goes next. And that includes the monsters. So like you can decide, I'm gonna pick all the players first and all that kind of stuff, and each player picks the next player and so on and so forth. But then that does mean that all the monsters are gonna get to go next, with no breaks in between. So sometimes it's strategic, and it throws a level of chaos into things, because like sometimes.
That's an interesting initiative mechanic. I kind of don't hate that.
It's really, really interesting. The whole table has to be down.
It really depends on the table. Yeah, it really depends on the table.
It depends on how your home game is. Like if we were all playing in person, I could see it being dope as hell. Because the wombo combos you can set up, you don't have to worry about, you know what I mean? Different things. It just opens up different avenues for combos and for team up abilities and stuff like that. However, if you're playing virtually, and especially not on camera, just audio, sometimes people don't want to sit at their computer for 4 hours. Sometimes they want to walk around a little bit. I know. So it's like, for me, I didn't like it.
Game,
I didn't like it for that reason.
Game, I definitely am very mobile while we're playing. Like it's very much, I'm walking upstairs, going downstairs, going out, grabbing a cigarette and all that. I have the benefit of having a wireless headset, so I'm never like just gone from the table.
Right.
But it is like the live play stuff that 10-15 minute break we do in the middle. Oh my gosh, it's a godsend.
Oh, like, 1,000,000%. Yeah.
I can't sit down and just do that,
Totally. I totally agree. Yeah, it's very, very different. The professional DMing gig that I do is like, it's a 3-hour game. I always put in like a 5-minute break in the middle, but even that, sitting down just for 3 hours is like, my antsiness is like going through the roof sometimes.
Yeah. Do you do video with that too?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Otherwise I wouldn't be sitting for the 3 hours.
That's fair. Valid.
In our home games, when it's just audio in our home games, I'm walking around the whole time. Not only because it helps my like neurospiciness, but also because I get into the characters sometimes. Yeah. Like I'm like walking around. I have a hunched back when I'm doing like the NPC Uncle Lude. I'm walking around with a hunched back and I'm going, ooh, all right, what are you thinking? Oh, that's a good idea. And it like helps me get into character a little bit. I don't have to worry about what I look like.
Right.
Keeps me active, keeps me engaged actually, to not be sitting down sometimes. But obviously, and it's a lot easier being engaged when you're the DM, just because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. You're always doing something.
Yeah. You're responding to somebody. It's although it is so nice sometimes when you are the DM and there's just like a great character moment between characters and they're just like running a scene and you're like, hell yeah, just keep RPing, baby. I love that. But okay, let's get into the meat of the episode, because we could talk about this all day, it seems.
Really good.
Maybe we'll do a whole episode on
combat.
Neurospiciness. Combat. Let's talk about it. So we'll start with when to have combat and why to have combat. Because as we've said, especially when you're talking about D&D, D&D, Pathfinder, stuff like systems like that, they are in many regards like combat simulators. There's other parts of it, of course, but that is a huge part of it. I mean, like when you look at the abilities of all the classes and subclasses and all that kind of stuff, so many of those abilities are combat abilities, right? So obviously that's what this system is kind of about. Naturally, combat is going to be a huge pillar of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you just want to throw in combat just because you're like, well, I got to have combat, so here's a combat. Bunch of goblins, bunch of wolves, because that can get really like boring and there's no stakes. So I think like when I think of like, why are we having combat? Some of it comes down to, why am I doing this? Why, as the DM, why am I putting this combat in there? Is it because A, they just got cool abilities? Sometimes it can be really surface level where it's like, well, they just leveled up and they got cool abilities. I want them to show it off. It's just as simple as that. Or it's deeply connected to the story. They're tracking down a villain that double-crossed them, and they want to enact their revenge. That's a really good reason that there's combat. Bane. Or there's some kind of event in the world. There was a prison break, and now you have to wrangle up all these, lost criminals and da-da-da. Or I'm trying to introduce this new setting. They just came to the Shadowfell for the first time, so I'm going to put a combat in the beginning that isn't super connected to the plot, but it is very connected to the setting. You're in the Shadowfell. Here's what the Shadowfell combat looks like. Yeah.
And I think that this kind of reasons. I think this kind of plays into what we were just kind of talking about of player engagement. It's a lot easier to keep the players engaged when there is a reason for the combat. Rather than just combat for combat's sake of, okay, we're going through the woods. Well, there's probably wolves in the woods. Okay, wolf encounter, go. Like that's kind of like a very what you were just talking about of the like just surface level combat for combat's sake type of deal of it's going to be really hard to get your players involved. Like nobody's going to want to use any of their cool abilities on just a handful of wolves. It's just going to be a matter of, okay, well, they're wolves. We're going to go hack and slash them. All right, combat's over.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, because it's like, okay, yes, there are wolves in the forest. Yes, those wolves might attack the party. That like, all those things track. However, what is making these wolves or this forest different from every other? Every time your players enter a forest, they get attacked by wolves. Are they?
Right.
What is going on? Do they have wolf bait on them? What is happening? So like you can just take that same idea of we enter the forest, this forest is full of wolves, so the wolves attack, and you can just amp it up a little bit by being like, okay, but what is this forest known for? What makes this forest different from other forests? Oh, maybe it's a swamp. It's a swampy forest. Okay. How does that change the wolves? Oh, now they're, I don't know, amphibious wolves. Whoa. Now you're talking. Now we're getting interesting.
Right.
And it's just
otherwise known as crocodiles.
Otherwise known as crocodiles. Everyone knows that. Swamp wolves are crocodiles.
Swamp wolves are crocodiles. Absolutely.
But yeah, like just adding in some interesting things like that is always a better way of doing things. I think it just makes things a little bit more exciting and memorable.
Yeah.
Stuff. No one's going to remember the fight against wolves unless something insane happens. But
right.
I don't know. Yeah, just keeping things interesting, switching things up, adding in new abilities. It's so much better.
Yeah.
Than just having combat for combat's sake. And also thinking about like, why are the wolves, again, amping up what is normally a basic situation, wolves fighting in the forest, amping it up another way. Why are the wolves attacking the party? Because you're talking about a pack of wolves I don't think a pack of wolves would normally attack a group of people depending on the size of the party and what they look like and stuff like that. You know? So maybe the wolves are very, very hungry and they're driven to desperation. Well, why are they driven to desperation? Okay, there's something going on in the forest that's causing that's like diminishing these wolves' normal food reserves. Okay, now we're getting interesting. Now we're like world building.
You're getting right, exactly. You can have players during the combat do like survival checks or nature checks or something along those lines to be like, hey, you haven't seen any other deer or any kind of other fauna around. So these wolves are actually like, you look at them, you know, medicine check, whatever. Oh, their ribs are showing. They're like all starving.
Bones. Yeah.
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 Something's going on in this forest. Yes.
Oh, they have fungi growing out of their brains. These aren't even wolves anymore. Like you could go so crazy with it.
Myconid hunters.
Exactly.
Oh shit.
That'd be sick. That would be sick. So there's so many interesting ways you can add things in there. There's also like another reason to have combat, and this one is a little more like mechanical and it's like less story driven. But like sometimes the way D&D balancing combat sets up and stuff like that, you don't necessarily want your party to have full resources, full spell slots, health, and all all 9 yards, especially like magic items that have like charges and stuff like that. Sometimes you don't want them to have everything for every combat. And therefore you have to do a couple of smaller combats or at least some sort of encounter that drain some resources. We've talked about that in the past. Sometimes that's really big. So you have this like, here's the mechanical reason that I'm putting this combat in here. It's to drain resources. Therefore, it's not.
But even those combats should have.
And exactly. Even then you back it up by saying, okay, what is going to put in there that's going to drain resources? Okay, it's going to be a couple trolls because they're in the swampy forest and that's where trolls are. Okay, what makes these trolls different? Why are the trolls attacking this party? Are they connected to the story in any way? All different kinds of stuff.
Yeah, definitely figuring out the why behind the combat is one of the most key parts to. I feel like we're going to keep harping on this all day, but like keeping that player engagement during a fight is always that why are they fighting is going to give your players a huge reason to stay engaged in the fight.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just like it's so true. I'm just thinking of all the times, like there are so many times when I'm just like flipping through monster manuals and stuff like that. And I find a cool monster. It's got cool stats. And then I start thinking like, okay, how do I use this? How am I going to utilize this particular monster? Or sometimes it's like the reverse where like for the Mall Madness 99, I knew you guys were going to fight these two people, right?
Right.
okay, what do they look like? Physically, I know what they look like, but like mechanically speaking, from a combat standpoint, what do they look like? What can they do? I had no idea. The day before, I think I kind of went through one of the monster manuals, found a couple monsters that were around the CR range I was looking for, and was like, all right, well, this one has a sick couple of abilities. That's dope. Let's do that. Oh, this one has some really cool abilities. It has a really specific one that's going to fuck up casters, which is going to single out one player, but it's not too crazy, so I think it'll work. And trying to fit everything in there,
Let's neutralize that damn cleric.
Yeah, and I think it fit, like it made sense given the circumstances and like the ritual that these bad guys were performing. It made sense that one of them would have sort of necromancer abilities, and it made sense that the other one would have axes and be an executioner butcher kind of, I don't know.
You gotta have those body parts.
Thing. Yeah, it's like it all leads up to this. It makes sense. Now you guys kind of have a better understanding of why you guys fought ghouls in episode 1 that were wearing clothes from the mall.
Right.
Why is this ghoul wearing a Jar Jar Binks shirt? Oh, oh, I get it. One of the bad guys is a necromancer and probably brought that guy back to life. Oh no.
Oh no.
So it kind of made sense.
Right.
Which is exactly what I was thinking. Like I found it and I was like, oh, this kind of closes that plot hole. I was like, perfect. This works out great. Incredible. And even though like, if you look at the monster artwork from what I used for old Donald, the guy looks like a skeleton. He looks like a super intense skeleton that has like a crazy headdress thing on, and is is vulnerable to radiant damage and like all this different stuff. Like, and so I just changed it up because I was like, well,
he was vulnerable to radiant damage. Damn it.
He technically was. I don't know if I would have ran with that, but I don't think it came up anyway.
No, I just because like I play the Sun Soul monk in that, and so like I have the ability to do the crazy radiant key blasts, but I really just wound up just running up to him and beating up an old man
in the face,
and an old lady
in the body and face,
in the face, yeah, in about and around the torso and face.
It was good. Yeah. It was cathartic in some ways. Sorry, boomers. But sometimes you gotta just get throat punched. And that's just how that goes. That's what my grandma used to say. My grandma on my dad's side used to always, anytime you would complain about somebody, you'd be like, oh, this person at work. She would just say, well, chop him in the throat. Like, all right, Grandma Diane, I don't think that's actually going to solve my problem. I actually think that might get me fired, but like, well,
I'll give it a shot.
Chop him in the throat. Like, okay. Now it's become like a family inside joke. Anytime someone complains, it's like, well, have you tried, and I'm just throwing this out there, have you tried chopping him in the throat? So fun. So speaking of combat, when and why to have combat and stuff like that, let's talk about when to have combat, because we talked about it in the regards of like story and like motivations and stuff like that. We've talked about resource drain a little bit, but let's also remind people who are unfamiliar, combat takes a long time sometimes.
It's forever.
It can
depending
take
on the table
very,
size,
very
it can be a slog.
It can be a slog. Another reason that for the actual plays, I make a lot of glass cannons, because I don't necessarily want to do 3 hours of combat.
Right.
Sometimes I want to do an hour and a half of combat. And in order to do that, factoring in the time that it takes players to decide what they're going to do, because sometimes strategies change, So like, sometimes it's like, I understand why the player is taking a couple minutes to figure out what to do, because the whole battlefield just changed. Because, so-and-so teleported over here, the rock slide came in and covered the entrance, like things changed. So I get it. But then like, it all depends on the table, but I would recommend not starting combat right towards the end of a session.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a time and a place for that if you want to do like a cliffhanger kind of situation. But usually, like, if you're going to set up that cliffhanger, I will usually end the session having them roll for initiative.
Yeah.
Or be like, okay, initiative is starting. We're going to start, next session by rolling initiative.
Exactly.
Rather than, okay, cool, we're 2 turns in, these guys are still like, they're bloodied, they're like half health, but we got to go. It's 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we got to go to bed. We all got work in the morning.
And like,
because that's like taking in that actual, like, taking a step back from the table and be like, okay, the actual time that we have to do this is not enough.
Right.
Maybe don't do it right then. Maybe do another 20 minutes of RP or something, or another 20 minutes of exploration, or have them, what is your camp like, or something like that, of having them do something else for that 20 minutes, because starting combat and then not being able to finish it is very unsatisfying to me as a player and also as a DM, because when you come back, you're going to have to get back into that same mindset, and people forget stuff. People, don't know, or, also opens up like the strategy thing of, we've at our table, we've done combats that have taken multiple sessions, and in these in between times of, 2-week break in between these combats, we'll go into a little group chat and sit and strategize for 2 weeks. We'll come up with plans. Now, granted, not everybody always sticks with the plan that they come up with, but we do, it very well could shift the game very much in the player's advantage.
Yeah, big time. Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's going to happen, and that's fine. It's not the end of the world if this happens. I don't want people to beat themselves up over it, but if you can avoid it, I would suggest it, and just be straight up with your players. Hey guys, you've entered the dungeon of the Vampire Lord, and shit's about to pop off, but combat takes a long time, so let's just end the session here. Assuming that there's only like 15-20 minutes until your hard cutoff time. If there's like an hour, then it's like, honestly, start the combat.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, just it depends on where you're at,
definitely. But it should always be something that you're kind of thinking about as far as, okay, how long is this combat going to take? Are we going to get it done? Are we going to have to, figure out a way to record our initiative order, where we're at in initiative, who's got, what resources are done, where's everybody's character sheets at as far as health and stat point or spell slots and stuff like that.
Yeah, consumables.
Some of that stuff can
items.
Get lost. Yeah, and it's like some of that stuff can get lost in between sessions where somebody comes in, oh crap, I accidentally hit the long rest button over the weekend.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
especially when
that's happened to me before.
Spells that last, like remembering, oh, I have jump cast on myself, or during the last turn of combat 2 weeks ago, I cast shield, and technically my AC is still up 5 from the last time, even though it's been 2 weeks, and like trying to remember all those different things can be really challenging. So yeah, I definitely recommend, like, that's why when it comes to session prep, it's nice to have a very soft, because again, players are going to fuck things up by no fault of their own. Fuck up is actually really strong. Players are going to change things up because of just the very nature of the game. But like, just having a soft outline of like, okay, they're going to stuff over here, and then combat, and then stuff over here. And then like, I always like to have, I like to go into combat with the understanding that it could take very long. There's a chance that they throw some crazy spells out there and it ends faster than I think.
Right.
And so I like to always have an idea of like, what if the combat is much shorter than I think? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like, I forgot that they could do X, Y, and Z and push people off ledges, or put people in bubbles, or whatever it is, or like, oh shit, I forgot that so-and-so can do radiant damage and this person's weak to radiant damage, like, or like, the troll depends on the regeneration for the combat to last any length of time, but 3 of them have access to fire stuff, so that's done.
Right.
So just, you never know. Combat is so weird. Most of the time, it takes a long time. But every once in a while, it can be fast as hell. Even when you think it's going to take a long time.
Shoves a brick in somebody's mouth and throws them off the edge of a map. It just kind of happens.
Sometimes you have Alex at the table and all rules go out the fucking window. I love Alex. I'm so excited that she's joining us for the game show.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately Jen can't make it, which breaks my heart.
No.
I know. It's so sad. We were very blessed to have backups. A waiting list. Crazy. Dude, wait till you see some of these prompts. They're so fucking dumb.
I'm excited.
They're so dumb. I sent Jeff a couple today just to give him an example because he was like really stressing about it. He's like, what kind of artwork should I send you? And I was like, bro, here's some prompt ideas to show you how little it matters. Look at this dumbass prompt involving the Rainforest Cafe. They're dumb, man. It's all good. Anyway,
yeah.
So that's it's good discussion about when to have combat, why to have combat. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of balancing a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a billion variables. That's why most encounter CR calculators are supposed to be taken with a grain, if not a mountain of salt.
Yes.
Because,
oh my gosh, do not rely exclusively on an encounter builder for anything. Really.
Yeah. And I use one for every single encounter I do. However,
it's a good starting point.
It's a good starting point. It's a good, soft idea. Because sometimes you're like, yeah, I think they'll be fine with this. And then you put it in the calculator and it's like, oh, this is actually 30,000 XP harder than I thought. Never mind. You're like, actually, this will kill them. Oh, no. I put in the fight that you guys had without any of the zombies. It was already really deadly. It was maybe I think it said that for a deadly fight for 3 level 8 characters, it was about 6,000 XP, give or take. And just 2 CR8, which the boomers were, it already was at 11,000. I reduced their health. The Margaret was supposed to have 170 health, and I knocked it down to 126.
Okay.
So that's almost 50 health away from her. And then little things, I wasn't adding bonuses to their damage rolls because it was already a 2d6, 2d8 for each hit.
Jeez.
So I just wasn't adding the +5 from strength, Not to mention it was just faster. Sometimes I cut corners because we're doing actual play. So I had a tab on my computer for the dice roller because both of those bad guys just so happened to have the exact same damage output for their hits. So I was like, oh, this is sick. I was like, I have a tab open that just rolls 2d6 and 2d8. Those are the attacks. And it just made it that much faster. You know what I mean? So beautiful. And then, I mean, we'll get into it, but then there's some changes you just make on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So with, talking about, encounter calculators, just for one more brief second here. An encounter calculator is a really good way for you to gauge where your players are at as far as, character sheet knowledge, team composition, stuff like that. If you build an encounter that is supposed to be medium and they're struggling with it, then, now that there's, encounters, you're going to have to kind of pull punches when it comes to big encounters if you're trying not to kill your party. On the other side of things, where I kind of started running into the problem is I was building every single encounter as a deadly encounter or a very deadly encounter, and they were still just walking through it. So you can't always, that's kind of why we're saying, don't always go by what the encounter calculator says, because there's a huge number of variables that go into it, especially depending on how big the table size is. Everybody has a different way of thinking. Everybody has a different way of coming at a certain problem.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah. Because there are some tables where, I do have to avoid the deadly encounter. And then there are others where I am going above and beyond as deadly as humanly possible because that's this particular party. So some of the variables to consider is how many party members are there. A lot of these things translate largely to action economy, But, how many party members are there, the team composition, stuff like that. And team composition is complicated in the sense that it's not just like classes. It's also like how many range versus melee, like spellcasters versus martial, and then also like healers and stuff like that too. But so team composition can be very complicated. What level everyone is, that's an obvious one. How many magic items? Because depending on how like generous the DM is with magic items, that changes things big time too. And like which magic items. For example, I gave you guys a drift globe pretty early on, right? I'm thinking, oh yeah, it makes some light. That's good. No big deal. Wait a minute.
I can never
the darkness
throw
spell
a set of vampires
is
at these
useless.
guys.
Yeah,
Right.
and if I get strict about sunlight sensitivity, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, because I also have a character at that same game who has a sunblade.
Yeah.
So if you notice, I don't do a lot of sunlight sensitivity creatures unless I'm genuinely like, oh, this is going to be a really easy encounter, because sunlight sensitivity absolutely will fuck a monster. So it's like,
right.
What's the point of having this badass vampire where it's like, yeah, disadvantage for everything? What's the point? So, sometimes you just hand wave a monster thing because you're like, all right, they're actually not. Sunlight's not a big deal, actually. But that's huge. And then also like how many resources they have. Are they full health and full spell slots, or have they already had some resources drained? And all of those things have to come into play. And that's just most of that is all just on the player side.
Yeah.
We haven't even got into the monster side of things, or villain or whatever. But yeah, I think, and we've talked about this before, one of the biggest things to consider is action economy, which is how many actions can each side take.
And there's a section of it in the Dungeon Master Guide on how to calculate this stuff, like how these calculators work. And the biggest thing of that you kind of find out about building encounters and stuff is when you have a certain amount of party members and a certain amount of monsters, you kind of have to multiply the XP or divide basically of how difficult the encounter itself is going to be based on strictly action economy, because the same monster, if you give it legendary actions, is going to jump like 3 CR levels, or it could jump 3 or 4 CR levels just because it can move more.
Yeah, it can take more attacks. Absolutely.
And vice versa. If you have a bunch of players at the table, this big ass monster that you've got is not going to be as strong because it can only go 4 times, and you have a table of 6 people. So already the action economy is super skewed towards the players.
100%. Yeah. It is like, there are some monsters, and some of this is why monsters get different CR levels and stuff like that, but because you can have a monster, I'm thinking of the Remoraz, this like ice insectoid behemoth that can burrow out of the ground, swallow creatures, does a ton of damage. If you hit it with melee, it's got superheated blood, so then it will do like a ricochet of blood splatter damage, all this crazy stuff. It's got 1 attack.
Yeah.
That attack fucking hits. It hits so hard, and then if you fail the dex save, you are swallowed. So it like is a huge deal, but it is only 1 attack.
Right.
So, like, if you miss, it's like, all right, well, that's the Remoraz's turn. They missed. So nothing happens, and now the players get a full round of shit. Comes back to the Remoraz's turn. If you miss again, it's like, whoa, geez, this Remoraz is actually doing nothing. Whereas if you hit on those 2 attacks, then it's huge. So there's so many things to consider. Just by throwing in a second Remoraz, you've infinitely made it different. Like, it is so much harder now. There's so many different things to consider, because it's not, action economy isn't the only thing to consider. We've used this example in the past. If you're using a high level D&D party, it doesn't matter how many fucking zombies you throw at them. If zombies only have a +3 to hit, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter that there's 20 zombies. If none of them hit, it doesn't matter. Right.
Right.
So like, action economy is so important, but it's not everything. It's like one of the most important things. All I'm trying to say is I've ran into that before where I was like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting for them to fight like 30 monsters all at once? The downside being, if it's a +2 or a +3, fucking, they're never going to hit. Even when they do hit,
they
do
have
like
to roll
no
a 20.
damage.
Yeah, they're going to have to roll a 20 just for the crit. Oh, they've got adamantine armor? Well, they're just never going to hit that person.
My life. At least they still hit. They just, they don't do the crit damage. But yeah, it's brutal. Yeah. It's a lot of like learning as you go. Learning what your players are capable of. Because you brought up a great example earlier of like, of knowing the character sheets and like knowing what characters are capable of is also really big. Like knowing that this character has these spells or something like that, or like knowing that this this map that I'm planning on using is really going to benefit the rogue because of X, Y, and Z, or vice versa. The map is a fucking flat ass plane of grass.
Yeah, there's nowhere for this rogue to hide. Yeah,
exactly.
Because I mean, yes, the rogue always has the option to bonus action hide. However, per the rule book, if there's nothing to hide behind, they can't hide. You can't just be standing out in the middle of the field and put your hands over your face and be like, you can't see me. Like, it doesn't work like that.
100%. Yeah, there's a lot of like little things like that. Like, man, even like,
which could make for an interesting dynamic in the combat of like, oh, well, now the rogue has to come up with something else to be able to do stuff, which your player might not be cool with. You know, but as long as it's not every single combat, you're like, oh no, this is a flat plane and you can't.
Yeah, it's just this one combat out of 10 combats. Like, that's not that big of a deal. Like, just because there's somebody in the group who focuses fire damage doesn't mean you can't throw a monster in there that's resistant to fire. But if you do it every fight, then yes, then it becomes dumb. It becomes mean. You're just singling out that player at a certain point, right? Like, which like. In the Mall Madness fight, technically, the one guy, he was resistant. He ended up being resistant to lightning damage. Technically, according to the stat block, he was also resistant to fire damage. But at this point, CJ's character, or CJ is the character, I should say. CJ, the character, had already established that he had used fire a bunch. So it was just like, well, I'm not going to take that away from him because it's the last big fight, you know.
Right.
Completely nerf his build, you know? So it was like, actually, he's not resistant to fire. And then he used lightning after that, and I was like, okay, now I'm going to say something. Now I'm going to say, okay, lightning is resistant, though. Because I know that's not going to nerf CJ that bad. CJ has a million other spells where he can just easily use fire. So it wasn't that big of a deal.
Wall of fire.
Exactly. Chromatic Orb also does fire.
Chromatic Orb also does fire.
Lightning, yeah. But tons of little tiny things like that. And when you're coming up, like, monster CR levels are so confusing because, I mean, I think D&D and Wizards has like tried to come out with like different explanations of why they are the way they are. And at the end of the day, it factors in two things. It factors in the monster's defensive abilities and offensive abilities. And so that's something that you have to consider when you have these groups, because it can be challenging to offer a balanced encounter for all of the party members. Sometimes one party member, or half the party or whatever, is at a slighter disadvantage than other party members. Like for using our home game party as an example, your character and Dirta have very high ACs. So if the fight is a bunch of monsters who just straight up make attack rolls, you guys have the advantage over the other two party members. Right. But then I mix in other monsters who do saving throw stuff. Now it changes a little bit. So there's like so many different things like that. Or, I throw in a bunch of casters who have counterspell. That obviously affects the spellcasters more than it affects the martial characters. So like there's so many things to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
because I mean, and it goes the other way too of, when you're planning out these encounters, of figuring out what monsters you can do to kind of keep that engagement level up, keep that challenge up without going crazy. And like, if you have a barbarian who's just smashing everything that you throw at them, give them something that's got a crazy AC. Give them something they're going to have to work to hit.
No doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Or throw something in there that does a weird type of damage that the barbarian doesn't get halved.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
So yeah, you can absolutely start to, and it gets really tricky because you never want to single a player out or like make it feel like you're punishing them for smart character decisions. Like they spent time making their character good at what their character's supposed to be good at. They've optimized their character. You don't want to punish them for that, but sometimes in order to challenge them, you do have to like exploit their weaknesses a little bit. This also, then that comes into how many combats you're having throughout the campaign, you know?
Right.
And if you're in a one shot and you have the big barbarian, it's like, man, if the one combat in the fucking one shot is like, oh, psychic damage, then it's like, wow, you really just fucked over the barbarian big time.
Yeah.
But if it's one that, that happens one fight out of 10, then it makes so much more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to kind of spread the, not the love, but spread the pain across the different party members, depending on, different fights. Because if you are doing, like my table does a lot of combat, a lot of combat. It's mostly combat. We have it's basically the role play is a way for us to get to more combat, because that's what my players like to do.
Yeah.
Like my players love combat. So, and that's totally valid. But having, okay, well, this combat, we're going to have, 4 spellcasters that have counterspell, and then see how they deal with that.
Yeah.
Or,
absolutely.
and then the immediately the next fight is going to be something to neutralize my melee characters. Either have somebody like a Dirta level caster where
wizard.
They're a battle wizard where they have spells that they can do, but also they have a 21 AC that goes to a 26 with, or higher with shield. Giving a fighter, like a frontline fighter, shield will make your players tremble.
Or your DM.
Or your DM. Either way. Yeah,
absolutely.
Both sides of that coin. Yeah. But yeah, giving a frontline fighter shield is definitely one of my favorite things as far as, as a frontline fighter with shield. I love it.
Yeah. But I'm surprised you haven't played an Eldritch Knight yet. I could see you having fun with that, especially for one of our shorter series,
Yeah. Yeah. I've thought about it. The Eldritch Knight just does not spark joy.
Yeah, it's an interesting build.
As a class.
I need to look at what 2024 changed about it, if anything. Well, I know they got weapon masteries are a big thing in 2024. That would make it way more exciting just off that. But anyway, so we have monsters with defensive abilities, things that include like high AC, a huge hit pool, regeneration powers, resistances to damage or conditions, legendary resistances if you're doing like legendary monsters. Different reactions or bonus action stuff that include like teleporting around the field, reactions like shield or counterspell. And then we have some offensive abilities, obviously having lots of attacks, having spells and different things, legendary actions, the damage output on average, like all different things that you can kind of figure out of why these monsters are the way they are. Like, don't necessarily make the assumption of, okay, I want to pick a CR4 monster. Well, all CR4 monsters are the same, and that is not true. Some of them have low AC and low hit points, but it's because they have an ability where if the players fail a saving throw, they go down to 0 instantly.
Yeah.
But also it has a 12 AC and 25 hit points. You know what I mean? So like,
it's really scary, but also it goes down really easily.
Exact. So there's like all different kinds of things like that. Another thing in considering balancing and stuff like that is just the number of combats between rests. Sometimes calculators even take that sort of stuff into consideration. Like when they call a combat medium or deadly or whatever, some calculators are taking into account that you're not having one fight per long rest.
Right.
So that's also, something to consider.
Yeah. Which is also, as far as balancing and stuff is concerned, like it's a really, it's something to definitely take into pretty high consideration. If you think that this, like a certain encounter is going to be too easy, like if the calculator says, oh, well, this is going to be a medium encounter for the, X party at this level, you know, but you want it to be kind of a story moment type of deal, then add a little resource drain. Give them that, side combat beforehand, and then don't give them a chance to short rest, or don't give them a chance to long rest in between the battles. Yeah. And, a lot, sometimes, especially, and I've come across this a couple of times with my party where I had to kind of break them of, okay, well, we finished this combat. We're going to take a long rest now. And, so they're coming into every fight at full whatever. Then you throw this, which, story-wise, kind of makes sense for them to do that. Okay, fine. But now where I'm going to throw you into this combat where you think that you're going to have a chance to rest, so they blow all their big spells, and you go, oh, by the way, the big bad's in the next room, and he's not going to let you rest. Let's go fight him.
Yeah.
And now they've blown all their big stuff on these little guys, and that completely changes the dynamic of the next fight.
Totally changes it. You have the very last little minion bad guy in their dying breath pulls out a fucking horn and blows it.
Right,
like, oh no, reinforcements. Something, because you want to balance all those things. It's okay to have easy or moderately difficult combats, and it's okay to have some combats that are death defying, insane to the last straw fights. Mix it up, because if it's all one of them, that could get a little intense.
Yeah, I think because the players will get tired of the super challenging fights too.
Yeah,
if you get too many
worrying about your character dying or something. Yeah, that's annoying.
Right. Yeah. Because it's supposed to be fun for everybody, and everybody kind of has that fun little like power fantasy of just going into whatever fight with monsters and just destroying stuff. You got to give that to them. You got to give it to them every once in a while. I'm not saying every fight needs to be that, but it really should be, its own, there's a time for each of them.
Yep.
Of doing the, super death defying, but also giving your players their chance to shine.
Yeah.
And I really do like, giving players that moment, as long as, and again, though, if you do it too much, that's going to get really boring and you're going to lose player engagement. So you got to,
it's just about switching things up.
A little bit of that. Yeah.
Switching things up. Like, hey, sometimes we're going to use undead monsters. Sometimes we're going to use celestials. Sometimes we're going to use aberrations, like whatever. That's always a fun way of deciding what combat is coming next and then making it fit within your world. Because, how you decide which monsters to use, there's like the mechanical side of balance, which we talked about. Then there's the story side of things. And then sometimes it's just like the reverse engineering of being like, dude, I just saw this monster stat block. How the fuck do I fit this in there? And you have to like reverse engineer your way into it, and jerry rig it so that it makes sense. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's fun, and that's okay too.
Right.
Like it's okay. It's actually really funny. It's a really funny idea actually to have like the whole campaign is like a massive dungeon crawl or something like that. And then just like, there's one random fight where it's just the players get teleported to another plane and they have to just do this one fight on this one plane. I don't know. Something really funny about that.
That was my early, I just had a flashback to my early D&D days, which like the port key, like because we had a rotating DM situation of, at the end of the session, that's it. You got to get everybody through what you're doing because next week somebody else is taking over. So the way that we kind of did it was like at the end of each fight there was some kind of like little port key thing where everybody touches it and then they're whisked away, and then we'll pick up next week with whatever Tommy has for their thing.
I love that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like that a lot actually. And another example of that is you guys this happened in our home game. It's Arctic environment, right? All the monsters some kind of cold damage. They are resistant or immune to cold damage. They have very obvious Arctic theming in terms of what they look like. And then I found a stat block for a large squirrel whose tail was made of fire. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I want to use this because it'll switch things up. It'll be like an interesting change. but why is it here?
Right.
And so I had to kind of math that out, but it was awesome. It was really fun. And speaking of that particular encounter, that encounter is a great example as a segue. Let's talk about ending combat.
Gotcha.
Because not every combat needs to end in death.
It's very true.
And the fire squirrel is a good example because it was a cute ass squirrel. It wasn't intentionally setting the forest on fire. It's made of fire. It was just walking past trees that were igniting. It's not trying to. And so it was a really fun challenge for the players of like, okay, shit. Well, we don't want to kill this fucking thing.
We don't want to kill the cute little squirrel, but we also can't let it keep doing what it's doing. So
exactly.
How do we do this?
So that was really exciting. I love encounters like that because it involves mechanics, right? Like it still is like a quote unquote combat encounter, sort of, even though there's not directly like fighting. I find stuff like that to be fascinating because it's like there's so many times with D&D where I'm looking for ways to resource drain that isn't necessarily straight up fighting. And I love the challenge of that because it doesn't come up a ton in like modules. At least I don't see it. And I think what you guys did with that was I think Fellis cast banishment.
Banished it? Yeah, I want to say we banished it to the fire plane. Yeah,
exactly. Which like.
Just go home, dude.
Yeah.
You very much don't belong here. Just go home. Just go home.
He doesn't even go here. So fun. Yeah, it was awesome. And so now if you are talking about straight up fights, then you have to ask yourself, would this monster / villain actually fight to the death? Now, sometimes, even most times, I think it's okay to be like, yeah, because it's way easier.
Right.
It's okay to be like, yeah, they are actually. They're zealots, they're straight up monsters, like trolls, like they're stupid. They don't really know. I don't know. Like there are times where it's like, yeah, they are actually just going to fight to the death because it's simpler and it is what it is. And because the alternative, at least for me, I can only think of two alternatives. There's either running away or negotiation.
Right. Which, I mean, it pretty much is surrendering, getting out of a hostile. Yeah, getting out of a hostile encounter because that's what we did with the Shadowfell Big Bad. You know, there was a point where we could have just sat down and taken every single turn to get this thing down to 0 HP, but it got to a point where like I've had it on the ropes, and I was like, okay, you can either keep fighting or just give up.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that was one of those moments for me as a DM of like straddling the idea of what would this character do, the NPC, the villain, whatever. And also thinking of it from a strictly mechanics, almost game design level of like, it's inevitable that they're going to win this fight. Like we're at the point where all the players are still up. This is the only bad guy left. They've won.
Right, they're circled around him.
If the only other option, so then the options are either agree to the negotiation, like I mean he can try and like renegotiate, but that'll be a discussion for later. Running away or just fighting to the death, which is literally just being like, okay, roll it to hit again, all right, and you kill him. Like what a dumb thing.
Right.
And running away is one of those things. I think it's so interesting because a lot of people talk about that in the D&D space. The idea that a lot of monsters, bandits, all these different things, goblins, whatever, like they're going to run away. They're not going to keep fighting. If they see their friend get murked, they're not going to be like, oh my God, they got Boblin. We have to fight to the death. It's like, no, dude, they're all going to be like more about self-preservation. They're going to leave. Now, here's the challenging part. What level is the party? What is the party capable of? Because at higher levels, running away is challenging.
Yeah, unless you've got something like Dimension Door or Arcane Gate or something like that where they are just able to poof out of there, most high-level parties are going to be able to chase down a pack of goblins.
Right, and sometimes the chase is fun.
No matter what.
Sometimes you should do the chase, even though you as the DM are like, they're going to catch them. Goblins and it run also 30 leads feet, to a good, there's a rogue and a monk, I'm fucked. I'm getting caught.
And that... okay. Right. And that kind of thing also kind of leads to a fun thing that we don't have I don't think we've really talked about too much, but leading to a skill challenge of, transitioning from combat to a chase sequence. Again, there are mechanics in the Dungeon Master's Guide for doing a skill challenge of, okay, so what are you doing to help the chase, or, help your party be able to find them better, or, doing, in the case of like a bandit fight in the middle of the city, like they're running through back alleys and like throwing the carts of stuff across their path and stuff like that. There's a lot of different environments that lead to running away of the enemies running away and then going to a skill challenge rather than being straight up combat, which is another way to use more of the character sheet.
Absolutely. And make it a bit more cinematic as well, and have it so that everybody can get involved. It's a little bit it makes it a little bit more interesting rather than just like, well, the monk has more speed, so they're just gonna catch up.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, okay, well, the goblin who's, the two goblins who are escaping, they're running through the thing. Hey, they trigger a little detonation device. The cave is now starting to cave in. So now it's not just chase the thing, it's you are also now having to escape just like the goblins.
Right.
So now it changes things, and you can have that that could be a lot of fun. We could do a whole thing on skill challenges, because skill challenges I think come from an older edition of, cause I don't know if 5e even has skill challenges in a super technical sense.
Not in a super technical sense. This is a 3.5 holdover for me that I still stand firmly behind.
No, so do I. I learned about it. I
love them.
You go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I love them to death. And like, I don't know if it's in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm pretty sure there was a section in the 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide where it literally gives you like a table of stuff where you can just have a skill challenge table of, okay, at the start of your turn, you roll a d20. Okay, this happens. Now, how do you deal with this problem?
Yeah.
And then basically the way that the quick overarching thing is, you give your players a set number of successes or failures. It's kind of like death saves for the whole party type of deal, where if after 5 successes you succeed, you catch the goblins and they give up wherever their big bad thing. Or if you get 5 failures, the goblins get away, and now you're gonna have to find another way to get your big bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And then because I think I learned about it through Matt Colville, who is a game designer, a big D&D nerd. He's got a YouTube channel where it's straight up just him talking most of the time. Just headshots of just him talking, and genius. The guy's so smart. I love all of his content, and he also has come out with a bunch of modules and books. He helped D&D Beyond has a new class for 2024 called the Ill Rigger.
Which we were going to talk about in the bonus action, but then we decided against it. Because it's not quite fleshed out.
Well, I think it's fleshed out in the sense that you just have to pay for it on D&D Beyond, and I just don't want to pay for it. But the versions that I was finding online for free, those ones were not fleshed out, and you could tell that these cannot be the final thing. These must be like homebrew stuff still.
Right.
That being said, he has come out with a whole system. I think it's called like Flea Mortals or MCDM or something. I can't remember all the different acronyms and names of games, but he always talks about skill challenges, and I've always been super interested in it as a concept of game design, because it is really fun.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting way of going about things. Hopefully your players are creative enough too, because like skill challenge to me personally, this is a totally personal taste. A skill challenge to me isn't fun if the players are just going, well, I'm really good in nature. Can I just make a nature check? All right, cool. 23.
Right.
How does that help the skill challenge? It's like, no. I want you to really go into depth. How does your nature check? What does it look like? Yeah. How do you think nature checks are going to help in this scenario?
Exactly.
Let's get into it.
Exactly.
Oh, I'm looking around the cave. I'm noticing that water is dripping. That means that, you know what I mean? Like, really get into it.
Mm-hmm. There's one of the very first actual play podcasts that I really got into. It's now called Greetings Adventurers. It used to be called Drunks and Dragons. But they, the DM for that group, is really smart in the way that they did it. Cause it started out in 3.5, like 5th edition came out in their like 2nd or 3rd season of actual play stuff. So they had been using 3.5 up until basically 5th edition came out. And, in one of them, basically there's a set of skill challenges that they do. And basically you can either do like every time it's your turn to do a skill challenge, a part of the skill challenge, you can only use a skill that you haven't used yet. So basically if you do have use the same skill, then the DC goes up by like 5 or 10.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It becomes more difficult to keep using the same ability, which definitely adds more to the player dynamic of players having to get more creative with what their skill checks are.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah. I like it. I like it a lot. And negotiation is a challenging thing because it always depends. There's a lot of different situations. It can feel, I always feel some type of way about the players rolling an intimidation check and then just rolling really, really high and me being like, okay, is this guy really just going to be like totally flip?
Right.
Like at a second ago, he was willing to fight to the death.
Right. Is he just going to be like, really okay.
So it's like, it can be challenging. It takes a lot of discussion into it. What I would recommend is thinking about how the combat would end before you even get into the combat. That way you're not like butthurt about whatever the situation ends up being, Right. You don't feel some type of way because we've all been there where you plan an encounter, you think you're like in your head, you're like, this is going to be nuts.
So cool.
And then things change and your monster who does 12 attacks on their turn gets slowed and now they do one attack.
Yep.
And you're like,
yep.
Okay. Did I mention that they have legendary resistances? Because actually, no. It's crazy. That's the best spell in the game. It's so good.
Slow is very good.
It really is
a very good one.
Such a good spell. Yeah, wow. So much combat can be so interesting and challenging, but it's also a ton of fun, and it's such a staple of the game. And listen, hey gang, if you guys have any questions about combat, if you want to send us in your stories about combat, your ideas, your situations where you're curious about our opinion on it or our take, feel free to send us an email over at soyouwannabeadm@gmail.com. And don't forget that this episode is brought to you by Fresca, America's #1 grapefruit beverage. It's so crisp and delicious.
All right.
And
that's all we can get into this time. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Soyouwannabeadm. Like Justin said, you can send us an email at soyouwannabeadm@gmail.com. If you like the episode, don't forget to give us 5 stars and a review wherever you found us. And also check for our Patreon and our Twitch links down in the description. Join us next time for more Dungeon Master tips and tricks.
Bye!
See you.
And now I have the honor of giving a shout out to the members of our Patreon gang. Nub Muffins, may Palor's light shine upon you. And then there's Lee, Talkscreen, Tappy, and Molly. We appreciate each and every one of you. Tune in next time for more tips and tricks from So You Wanna Be a DM.